away from the vehicle now. You're being detained.
Officer, I paid for gas. I'm checking my oil. I have the receipt.
Don't reach for anything. You fit the description.
You just put hands on a lawful citizen without probable cause.
Turn around. Hands on the pump.
This is a mistake you won't walk away from.
Thorne, a 58-year-old black man standing 6'2" with broad shoulders that hadn't slumped an inch since his retirement, wiped his hands on the rag. He moved with a deliberate slowness that only men who have stared death in the face possess. "Officer, I'm checking my oil. I just bought $40 of premium at pump 4. I didn't ask you for a story. I told you to step away from the car." Miller closed the distance, his eyes darting between Thorne and the expensive muscle car. In Miller's mind, the equation didn't balance. An older black man dressed in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans tinkering with a classic car worth upwards of $60,000 at a rundown station off the interstate. "We got a call about a suspicious individual loitering and casing the store. You fit the description. Loitering." Thorne's voice was a deep baritone, calm as a mill pond. "I've been here 12 minutes. I filled the tank. I bought a quart of oil inside. I have the receipt in my pocket." "Don't reach for anything," Miller shouted, his voice cracking slightly. He unclipped the retention strap on his holster. The escalation was immediate and unnecessary. "You're making people nervous, pal. Why are you hanging around the pumps if you're done pumping? Why is the hood up? Trying to hotwire it?" Thorne looked at the officer. Really looked at him. He saw the sweat beading on Miller's upper lip, the slight tremor in his hand, the arrogance masking insecurity. "It's a 50-year-old car, son. It runs rich. I'm checking the levels before I get back on the highway. And it's my car. That's what they all say. I need ID, now." Miller stepped into Thorne's personal space violation of protocol number 1. He was trying to provoke a reaction, trying to get the older man to flinch or shout back. "My wallet is in the glove box," Thorne said, keeping his hands visible, palms open. "I'm going to close the hood and then I can get it for you." "I said stay away from the car." Miller shoved Thorne. It wasn't a gentle guide. It was a hard, two-handed shove against the chest of a man who had led platoons through desert storms. Thorne stumbled back half a step, catching his balance instantly. His eyes hardened. The friendly mechanic demeanor evaporated, replaced by the steel gaze of a man who used to command hundreds of soldiers. "You are making a mistake, officer," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave, losing all warmth. "I am a paying customer. I am on private property conducting lawful business. You have no probable cause to touch me." "I have a complainant who says you're trespassing." Miller spat back, emboldened by Thorne's lack of physical retaliation. "And now you're failing to obey a lawful order. You want to go the hard way. We can go the hard way." Thorne didn't blink. He had faced down insurgents, navigated minefields, and negotiated with tribal leaders in active war zones. He wasn't afraid of a beat cop with a power trip, but he also knew the statistics. He knew that in this situation, his rank, his history, and his truth might not be enough to save him from a bullet. "I am asking you to de-escalate," Thorne said clearly. "I am a retired Army captain. My identification is in the vehicle. If you let me get it, we can resolve this." "Army captain?" Miller scoffed, shaking his head. "Yeah, and I'm the police commissioner. Turn around. Hands on the pump. Now." Marcus Thorne had spent 24 years in the United States Army. He didn't just serve, he excelled. He had earned his Ranger tab at Fort Benning when he was just 22, pushing his body past the point of exhaustion until breaking was no longer an option. He had deployed to Panama, then the Gulf, and finally 2 tours in the early days of Afghanistan. He retired as a captain, a logistician, who could move a city's worth of supplies through a needle's eye under enemy fire. He held the Silver Star for valor, awarded after he pulled 3 men from a burning Humvee while taking direct fire in the Kuwaiti desert. He was a man of precision. In his post-military life, he worked as a high-level logistics consultant for defense contractors. He lived his life by the code he had sworn to decades ago, duty honor country. He paid his taxes on time, he flew the flag on his porch every morning, and he treated every person he met with the respect they earned. He was currently on a solo road trip from his home in Virginia to visit his daughter in Atlanta for her 30th birthday. The Chevelle was his pride and joy, a restoration project he had spent 5 years perfecting. Every bolt, every hose, every strip of chrome had been installed by his own hands. It wasn't just a car. It was his therapy, his meditation. Thorne knew the regulations of engagement better than the officer standing in front of him. He knew the use of force continuum. He knew that respect was a two-way street, but authority was a burden that required discipline. And looking at Officer Derek Miller, Thorne saw a complete lack of discipline. He saw a man who treated the badge not as a shield to protect, but as a sword to intimidate. Thorne stood by the pump, the smell of gasoline and asphalt heavy in the humid air. He thought about his daughter waiting for him. He thought about the silver star sitting in a velvet case in his study. He thought about the irony of surviving mortar attacks only to be threatened by a boy in blue because he was checking his oil while black. He maintained his composure because that was what real officers did. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He stood at the position of attention, a reflex ingrained in his muscle memory. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice steady, "I am not refusing. Not. I am informing you that my identification confirms my ownership of this vehicle. You are currently detaining a retired officer without reasonable suspicion." Miller wasn't listening. He didn't see a captain. He didn't see a father or a grandfather. He saw a stereotype. He saw a threat to his control. The psychology of the moment was fragile. Miller had committed to the narrative that Thorne was a criminal. To back down now would be to admit he was wrong, and for men like Miller, admitting error was a sign of weakness. "You don't tell me what I'm doing." Miller snapped his hand, tightening on his baton. "You're loitering. The manager wants you gone. That makes it trespassing. And your attitude, that's obstruction." Thorne watched the officer's eyes. He saw the dilation of the pupils, the rapid breathing. Adrenaline was flooding Miller's system, shutting down his higher cognitive functions. Thorne knew that look. It was the look of a green recruit who was about to make a fatal error because they were too scared to think. But this wasn't a war zone. This was a Liberty stop-and-go gas station off I-85. And the enemy wasn't across the line. The enemy was the bias ingrained in the man with the gun. Officer Derek Miller had been with the department for 6 years. On paper, he was adequate. In reality, he was a liability. His personnel file was a graveyard of unsubstantiated complaints, 9 of them to be exact. Harassment of teenagers at the mall, aggressive traffic stops involving minority drivers, unnecessary use of force during a noise complaint. Each time, the Internal Review Board had cleared him, citing insufficient evidence or officer discretion. He was known in the locker room as a guy who got numbers, a proactive cop who didn't wait for crime to happen. He went out and found it even where it didn't exist. The call that brought him to the gas station had come from Brad, the 35-year-old station manager. Brad was watching from behind the bulletproof glass of the cashier station, a phone pressed to his ear. Brad was the kind of man who called the homeowners association if his neighbor's grass was half an inch too high. He had watched Thorne pull up 12 minutes ago. He watched the beautiful car. He watched the black man get out. And his mind, poisoned by years of prejudice he called being careful, spun a story. "He's been there too long," Brad had told the 911 dispatcher. "He's just standing there, looking around. He's looking at the cameras. I think he's going to rob the place. Or maybe he's dealing drugs. Nobody stands at a pump that long." "Has he bought anything?" the dispatcher had asked. "Yeah, gas. But he's still there. He's opening the hood now. He's faking car trouble. Just send someone. He's making my customers uncomfortable." There were no other customers at the pumps when Thorne arrived. The uncomfortable feeling was entirely Brad's own invention, projected onto a man who was simply existing. Brad wanted Thorne gone because Thorne didn't fit Brad's image of a Chevelle owner. When Miller received the dispatch, "Suspicious person refusing to leave possible casing of business," he didn't ask clarifying questions. He hit the lights and sirens. He arrived with a script already written in his head. The script said black male plus loitering plus muscle car equals drug dealer or car thief. So when he confronted Thorne, he wasn't looking for an explanation. He was looking for confirmation. Every word Thorne spoke, no matter how polite, was filtered through Miller's bias as defiance. The calm demeanor wasn't discipline, it was arrogance. The explanation of checking oil wasn't a fact, it was a cover story. Miller had checked his dash cam before getting out, making sure it was angled, but he hadn't turned on his audio immediately, a mistake he often made. But he didn't count on the audience. By now, the commotion had drawn eyes. A trucker named Hank, a burly man in his 50s with grease under his fingernails, had stepped out of his cab at the diesel pumps. A traveling nurse named Brenda, stopping for a soda, was standing by her sedan. They saw what was happening. They saw the aggressive posture of the young cop and the statue-still stance of the older man. Hank pulled out his phone. Brenda did the same. "Officer," Thorne tried one last time, his voice projecting so the witnesses could hear. "I am asking you to verify my credentials. I have a valid driver's license and a retired military ID in the glove compartment. I am asking for permission to retrieve them." "Denied," Miller shouted. "You're not reaching for anything. You're refusing to identify." "I am not refusing," Thorne corrected him, speaking to the cameras now. "I am offering to provide it. You are preventing me from doing so." "That's it," Miller snapped. The presence of the witnesses didn't calm him. It agitated him. He felt the pressure to perform to dominate the situation so he didn't look weak in front of the civilians. "Turn around. You're under arrest." Miller lunged forward. He didn't issue another warning. He grabbed Thorne's left wrist. Thorne's arm was solid as oak. For a split second, Miller couldn't move it. Thorne had the strength to toss the officer across the hood of the car if he wanted to. It would have been easy. Basic leverage. But Thorne knew that if he resisted even defensively, he would die. The narrative would become suspect attacked officer. So Thorne went limp. He allowed the younger, weaker man to twist his arm behind his back. "I am complying," Thorne said loudly. "I am offering no resistance." Miller wasn't satisfied with compliance. He wanted submission. He yanked the arm up high, dangerously close to the rotator cuff. Thorne winced, a sharp pain shooting through his shoulder, the same shoulder that had taken shrapnel in 1991. "Stop resisting," Miller yelled for the benefit of the cameras, despite Thorne standing perfectly still. "He ain't resisting," Hank the trucker bellowed from 20 feet away. His phone held high. "We can all see it, officer. He's standing still. Back off." Miller pointed his baton at the trucker before grabbing Thorne's other hand. He slapped the handcuffs on. He didn't check for fit. He ratcheted them down, tight metal biting into the wrist bone. "You are arresting a United States veteran for checking his oil." Thorne said, his face pressed against the hot metal of his own car. "You are making a career-ending mistake, son." "Shut up," Miller grunted, patting Thorne down roughly. He pulled the wallet from Thorne's back pocket. He didn't open it. He just shoved it into his own cargo pocket. "You can tell it to the judge." Miller dragged Thorne away from the Chevelle. "My car," Thorne said. "You cannot leave it unlocked. The hood is up." "It'll get towed," Miller said dismissively. He marched Thorne toward the patrol car. The shame of it burned Thorne, but not as much as the injustice. Being marched like a criminal in front of strangers. A man who had commanded respect from generals was now being manhandled by a delinquent with a badge. Hank, the trucker, stepped closer as they passed. "I got it all on video, brother," he said to Thorne. "I ain't leaving until I get your car secured. I'll wait for the tow truck and make sure they treat it right." Thorne nodded once at the man, a silent thank you, The Brotherhood of the Road. Miller shoved Thorne into the back of the cruiser. The hard plastic seat was cramped. The heat inside was stifling. Miller slammed the door, sealing Thorne in. As Miller walked around to the driver's seat, he felt a surge of adrenaline-fueled pride. He had taken control. He had removed the threat. In his mind, he was the hero of this story. He got in breathing heavy and radioed dispatch. 1 male in custody, 10 to 15. Transporting to precinct, tow required for suspect vehicle. Copy that, 10 to 15. Dispatch crackled. The drive to the station was 10 minutes of silence. Miller kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting Thorne to be cursing, kicking the windows, or begging for a break. That's what the usuals did. But Thorne sat upright despite his hands being cuffed behind him. He looked out the window, his expression unreadable. He was memorizing the route. He was noting the time. He was cataloging the officer's badge number 4922, which was visible on the dashboard computer. Thorne was not a prisoner. He was an operator gathering intelligence. He was preparing his after-action report. He knew that the battlefield had shifted from the gas station to the courtroom, and he intended to win. Miller, on the other hand, was already rehearsing his report. Suspect was belligerent, refused to leave scene, exhibited threatening behavior, refused to ID. He would sprinkle in the keywords that supervisors liked to see. Officer safety, rapid movement, furrowed brow. He convinced himself the lies were true before they even reached the station. They pulled into the sally port of the precinct. The heavy metal doors rolled down behind them. Miller hauled Thorne out of the car. "Let's go," Miller said, gripping Thorne's bicep. They walked through the booking intake and into the main squad room. It was a bustling afternoon. Phones ringing, officers typing reports. At the main desk sat Sergeant Thomas Reynolds. Reynolds was 60 years old, a Vietnam-era Marine who had transitioned to policing in the late 80s. He was old school. He had white hair, a face carved from granite, and eyes that didn't miss a damn thing. He had been trying to get Miller fired for 2 years, sensing the danger the young hothead posed to the department. Reynolds looked up as Miller paraded his prize through the room. He saw the handcuffs. He saw the gray t-shirt. But mostly he saw the walk. He saw the way Marcus Thorne held his head. He saw the rhythm of his step. Reynolds knew that walk. It was the command walk. It was the posture of a man who was used to people standing up when he entered a room. Reynolds stood up slowly behind his desk. His eyes locked onto Thorne. Then he looked at Miller. "What do you have there, Miller?" Reynolds asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Loitering and failure to obey from the Liberty Stop and Go," Miller said, puffing his chest out. "Suspect refused to leave the property, refused ID, resisted arrest." Resisted? Reynolds walked around the desk. He stopped 3 feet from Thorne. He looked at the man's wrists, seeing the red pinch marks where the cuffs were too tight. He looked at the dust on Thorne's knees where he'd been checking his car. "Sir," Reynolds said, addressing Thorne, not Miller. "Are you injured?" "I am not injured, Sergeant," Thorne replied. "However, the circulation in my hands is compromised." Miller rolled his eyes. "He's fine, Sarge. He's just complaining." "Silence," Reynolds barked. The room went quiet. Every officer stopped typing. Reynolds never shouted. Reynolds turned back to Thorne. "May I ask your name, sir?" "Marcus Thorne, Captain U.S. Army retired." The air left the room. Miller let out a nervous laugh. "Yeah, he said that at the scene. Didn't have any proof, though." "You have my wallet in your cargo pocket, officer," Thorne said calmly. Reynolds held out his hand to Miller. "Give it to me." "Sarge, I haven't processed him yet. I need to." "Give me the wallet." Reynolds's voice was like a whip crack. Miller hesitated, then reached into his pocket and slapped the leather wallet into Reynolds' hand. Reynolds opened it. He bypassed the credit cards and cash. He pulled out the blue retired military ID. He looked at the photo. He looked at the rank. He looked at the common access card behind it. He saw the folded copy of the DD-214 Thorne kept for VA appointments. Reynolds looked up. His face was pale, not with fear, but with a righteous fury. He looked at the silver star lapel pin Thorne had pinned to his wallet, a habit of old soldiers. Reynolds closed the wallet gently. He looked at Miller with eyes that could peel paint. "Uncuff him." "Sarge, he was trespassing," the manager said. "Uncuff this man right now. Miller or I will rip that badge off your chest myself." Reynolds roared a sound that echoed down the hallways. Miller fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking. He unlocked the cuffs. Thorne brought his hands forward, rubbing his wrists. He didn't rub them fast. He did it slowly, maintaining eye contact with Miller. "Captain Thorne," Sergeant Reynolds said, snapping to a rigid position of attention. He offered a sharp, crisp salute. "I apologize on behalf of this department. This is a disgrace." Thorne returned the salute, casual but perfect. "Thank you, Sergeant. Semper Fi." "Rangers lead the way, sir," Reynolds replied, acknowledging the tab he knew a man like Thorne would have. The captain of the precinct, attracted by the shouting, burst out of his office. Captain Harrison, 55, saw the tableau. He saw his desk sergeant saluting a black man in a T-shirt. He saw Miller looking small and terrified. "What is going on here?" Harrison demanded. "Officer Miller just arrested a decorated Army captain for checking his oil," Reynolds said, his voice dripping with disgust. He refused to verify ID. He used excessive force, and he brought him into my house in cuffs. Harrison looked at Thorne. He looked at the ID Reynolds handed him. He looked at Miller. "My office," Harrison said to Miller. "Now, leave your gun and badge on the desk." "But, Captain, the manager called. I followed procedure." Miller pleaded, his world crumbling. "There is no procedure that allows for stupidity and bias," Harrison said. "You arrested a federal consultant and a war hero because a gas station clerk got nervous. You're done." Miller placed his belt on the desk. The metallic clatter sounded like a funeral bell for his career. He walked into the office, head down. Thorne stood in the center of the room. He didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy that had been averted, but the scar remained. "Captain Thorne," Harrison said, turning back. "Can I get you some water? Coffee? I can have a car take you back to your vehicle immediately." "I would appreciate a ride," Thorne said. "And I want the names of everyone involved, including the manager who made the call. I intend to file a formal complaint, and I assume the body camera footage will be preserved." "It's already being pulled, sir," Reynolds said. "I'll make sure of it personally." "Good," Thorne said. He adjusted his shirt. "I have a daughter to visit. I'm already late." The fallout was swift, public, and absolute. Hank the trucker posted his video before Thorne even left the station. By the evening news, the headline, "Officer Arrests Silver Star Recipient for Loitering," was trending nationwide. The juxtaposition of Thorne's calm dignity and Miller's frantic aggression was undeniable. The investigation that followed was a formality. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division stepped in within 48 hours. They didn't just look at this incident. They opened the vault on Miller's 9 previous complaints. They found a pattern of systemic negligence by the department supervisors who had kept him on the street. The city settled with Captain Marcus Thorne for $6.5 million. It was one of the largest settlements for a wrongful arrest in the state's history. Brad, the manager at Liberty Stop and Go, was fired the next day. The corporate office of the gas station chain issued a national apology and donated $500,000 to veteran charities, but the Liberty Stop and Go brand was permanently stained. Brad gave a tearful interview claiming he wasn't racist, but the audio of his 911 call played on loop, proving otherwise. Officer Derek Miller was fired. He was stripped of his certification, ensuring he could never work in law enforcement again. He was also charged with misdemeanor assault and deprivation of civil rights charges that would follow him for the rest of his life. But for Marcus Thorne, the money and the firings didn't fix the underlying crack in the foundation. 6 months later, Thorne sat on the porch of his home in Virginia. The Chevelle was parked in the driveway, gleaming in the sunset. The settlement check was in the bank set aside for his grandchildren's education. He held a cup of coffee, staring at the American flag fluttering on his lawn. He thought about the oath he took to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. He thought about the irony that the country he fought for still hadn't figured out how to fight for him. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just tired. He realized that to men like Miller and Brad, his rank didn't matter. His service didn't matter. Without the uniform, without the ID, he was just a body in a space where they felt he didn't belong. Thorne took a sip of coffee. He would keep restoring cars. He would keep visiting his daughter. He would keep walking with his head high, not because he needed to prove anything to them, but because he knew who he was. But the question remained hanging in the quiet evening air. How many other men were out there standing at gas pumps who didn't have a silver star to save them? How many were in handcuffs right now because they didn't have the rank to make the sergeant stand up? That was the war that wasn't over, and Marcus Thorne knew it was a war he would be fighting until his last breath. What do you think? Should officers be required to verify ID before using physical force in nonviolent situations? And do you think the manager should have faced criminal charges for making a false report? Let me know in the comments below. If you believe stories like this need to be told, hit that like button and subscribe. We need to keep shining a light on the truth.